Ladies and gentlemen, today we will be doing a historical deep dive into the 1972 World Chess Championship match between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky. For 24 years, the Soviets dominated top-level chess, maintaining the World Championship title. But going into the match, Bobby Fischer was a man on a mission. The year prior, he won 20 games in a row, dominating everybody and winning the candidates tournament. He was also astoundingly 120 ELO points higher rated than Spassky. Obviously, there was also the element of the Cold War at play, US versus the Soviets. The format of the match was best of 24, so that's the first person to score 12.5 points, and in the case of 12-12, the world champion would retain his title. But the match almost didn't even happen because Fischer had a lot of different demands, mainly like 30% of the television revenue and 30% of the box office. I'm gonna take you through the story and the drama of the match. Let's jump into the games. We kick things off with game number 1, which was a relatively peaceful affair. It began with something known as the Rogozin defense of the Queen's Gambit declined, and honestly, by the middle game, Queens had been traded. By move 12, the players traded off a decent amount of pieces, and the pawn structure by both sides was pretty much in the balance. Spassky with the white pieces, Fischer obviously with the black pieces. It's not a game that requires a deep level of analysis. It's one of the reasons I'm actually going to breeze through. You see more pieces coming off the board. Fischer trades. It was a weird one. It was kind of a feel-out game. And by this moment, it's clear that we're going to have an endgame. And several moves later, another set of pieces of trade. You say, well, why would you start with this? Well, I'm starting with this game because after the move b5, we have the first epic moment in the match. Fischer spends a little bit of time here, and he plays bishop takes h2. Now, if I ask you to pause here and say, what would you play here with the white pieces? You might not pause, you might pause, but of course, you're going to play the move g3. And Boris Spassky just traps the bishop, because if you go to g1, like this, I bring in my king, and this bishop just has no escape, right? Now, there was some speculation after the move g3 that Fischer had calculated h5, coming in to help the dark squared bishop here on h2, for example, king to e2, h4, trying to sacrifice the pawn in order to escape, but after king f3, maybe this, and so the king would have to come around from the other side to get the pawn, and the bishop would try to escape. And people speculated, like Garry Kasparov, that Fischer missed this idea, the fact that he actually will escape for a moment, but continue to be locked in. And ultimately, the game proceeded in this fashion. With king to e7, Fischer was forced to sacrifice his bishop, and a short while later, he ended up resigning the game. And with this, Boris Spassky took a 1-0 lead in the match. So obviously, this was a completely insane start to the match. We have Bobby Fischer in a completely innocuous endgame playing the move bishop takes pawn, getting his bishop trapped like that, and going down 1-0. Now, the craziest thing is that after this first game, this improved the head-to-head score of the players overall in their careers to 2 draws and 4 wins for Boris Spassky. Bobby Fischer had not defeated him up until this moment, and Bobby refused to play the second game because of the cameras in the room. Apparently, there was cameramen with whirring kind of cameras rather than having them stationary and kind of quiet, and Bobby just refused to show up, and his appeal ultimately was denied. So now he's down 2-0 and ready to just completely leave the match. And the story goes that he was boarding the plane to depart back to the United States before he was stopped by his team and convinced to ultimately come back and play. However, Bobby demanded that the third game be played backstage, and Boris Spassky, who, you know, just was a master of equanimity and wasn't kind of ruffled by all of this, just sportingly agreed. And experts agree that this was the turning point in the match. So the same color situation as the first game, but this time, we have c5, and this is known as the Benoni defense after d5, ed5, cd5, d6. Essentially, what black wants is to allow this wedge in the center of the board, but to play the move g6, and then ultimately bishop to g7. And this bishop will be a long-range weapon. Now, you would say, why would white do something like this? Like, why would white play knight f3, knight d2, blocking their bishop? That's because further down the line, white wants to put the knight on c4, where it will exert pressure here, and you will play a4 to suppress black's movement on the queen side. This knight kind of camping spot on c4 is very nice. This bishop is very powerful, but Fischer creates a position that's extremely imbalanced with the black pieces, both sides castle, and we have this position. And here, Bobby basically breaks a very kind of standard positional principle by playing the move knight to h5. Basically, he wants to go knight f4, but this allows what looks like a devastating demolition of his pawn structure. First of all, he has doubled isolated h-pawns. This could be a target for the future. And just furthermore, in all endgames, this is just a gigantic liability. Spassky continues with knight c4. Bobby plays knight e5, counteracting the knight and defending that with his queen. And then we have knight to e3, and now he just plays queen h4 like nothing happened. He's like, you know what? Like, it doesn't matter that my pawns are doubled. I am counterbalancing what might be a positional drawback here with dynamic play, with a move like knight to g4. And after takes, I've actually clarified my pawn structure forever. My dark square bishop still reigns supreme. My rook maintains pressure on this, and I do have a weak pawn, but I'm not going to give you any time to protect it. So bishop to f4... sorry, I'm not going to give you any time to attack it, right? Not protect it. Queen back to f6, and, you know, Spassky plays g3, bishop d7. Fischer prepares a little bit of a kind of advancement on the queen side by playing b6, a6, and now b5. And so Fischer has consolidated this. It's not, you know, the only thing that can attack it is the dark squared bishop, and the queen is just simply protecting it. He still maintains this. He's got a very nagging kind of light squared bind on this side of the board. And well, he plays queen g6, and now he begins fighting on all three sides. I mean, it's kind of fascinating how he's got pressure on the center, he's got pressure on the queen side, and he's always got this lurking advancement on this side of the board. So he plays rook to e7, plays rook b8, kind of improving the positioning of his pieces, b4, and now c4, and the queen has to drop back. So the evaluation of this position 27 moves in is that Fischer has a slightly better position because of a bit more pressure, a bit more kind of tangible pressure on the weaknesses, whereas Spassky's got pressure on things that are very well defended that he cannot kind of attack more than Fischer can defend. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, what I said about that lurking threat, h5. And then all of a sudden, you know, Fischer's trying to make progress on this side. Now here, they briefly repeat. And then here, Bobby Fischer just says, you know what, I got a damn good bishop, but kaboom, and let me come and take this pawn. And here, Spassky is relying on the fact that in entering this endgame by swapping all the pieces off the board, ultimately, this will be decided by a concept known as the opposite-colored bishops, which could be a draw, because ultimately in endgames with just opposite-colored bishops and some degree of pawns of both players like that are similar, like 4 versus 5 or even 4 versus 2 in some rare cases where, you know, it's like 1 or 2 pawns, that opposite colored bishops could be a draw. But here's the problem. Bobby Fischer is only going to trade queens if he is 100% convinced that he has a win, and furthermore, he might just not trade the queens at all. He might just maintain the pressure with the queen and the bishop. But they also do say that the opposite-colored bishops favor the attacking player. And when you go in an attack on a king, the opposite-colored bishops will favor the person attacking because one of the bishops cannot defend against the other. And in this position, Boris Spassky resigned because, for example, if he were to play king to e1, there would be a winning of a second pawn, and then bishop to d2 would lead to just checkmate. I mean, it's just mate on the back rank. So, Bobby got his revenge, and it's now 2-1, and a lot of people, like I said, just basically said this was a big mistake by Spassky to even allow them to play kind of backstage and away from all the pressure and all the cameras and everything like that. So now with this next one, we will move to game number 5. So the players have the exact same colors, and they drew the game in the middle, so it's 2.5, 1.5. D4, knight f6, and you'll say, well, this looks pretty similar, but now we have kind of a fusion. The first game, we saw bishop to b4 and pawn to d5. This game, we see a Nimzo-Indian defense, c5, and a variation known as the Hübner variation, where black trades off the dark squared bishop to damage the structure of white, and you'll notice how black sets up here, putting every pawn on dark squares, even though you've made a couple of kind of moves already. With that e-pawn, you play e6 and e5. Now, why would Fischer want this? Why would he go for a position that looks like this? It looks like he's very passive. His pieces are kind of stuck. Well, here's the thing. When you trade one bishop for 2, you want to keep the position closed. You don't want the player with the bishops to open up the position, because then the bishops will be very useful. And as you can see in this position, almost all of the important pawns that black has are on the dark squares, counteracting the dark squared bishop that you have presented to your opponent. But we have f4, and Boris Spassky is going on an initiative, right? He wants pawn takes f4, and then he wants bishop f4, and kind of to the untrained eye, it looks like this is simply a fork, but there was some preparation here. e5. Now, I don't know. I didn't ask Boris Spassky if there was preparation here, but e5 would have been quite strong. You can take both, but I'll take, and I'll open up this line to your king, and it's very dangerous. So Bobby Fischer here played the move knight g6, offering a trade, a voluntary kind of non-standard transformation of the pawn structure, but everything important remains on a dark square. 6 of 7 of his pawns are on dark squares. White's other light squared bishop, well, not other light squared bishop, other bishop on the light squares, is boxed in by its own pawns. And we have castles, a4, a5, rook b1. And, well, because of the early splitting of the pawns, right? Long time ago, Bobby Fischer played bishop takes, pawn takes, right? And split the pawns here. Everything on a light square is just a target. So this is a permanent target for the black position. So now we have rook b2, rook b8, rook f2, queen e7. Now Bobby has officially pushed every single pawn that he has onto a dark square. It's almost like all the pieces of Exodia. You draw all the pieces, and now we have kind of the game coming to its conclusion. And it's borderline impossible to make any progress here with white at all. I mean, it's just nuts. Like the greatest Soviet player of that era, can't make any progress whatsoever with the white pieces. Let alone, like, it's with the white pieces. Like, Boris, it's considered an advantage to be playing with white because you can kind of set the tone of the game, and Bobby Fischer's got a bit of a predictable repertoire. No, Bobby now begins a transformation. Once again, we have this transformation. Last game we saw 2 rook swaps, now we have 2 rook swaps, but this doesn't help white in the slightest. And, we got queen to c2 here, adding a layer of defense to this pawn, except for the fact that it literally doesn't have any, no, bishop takes a4. Say, what? What about this? No, queen e4, threatening this and this, and it can't be, there's nothing you can do. Nothing you can do. And Boris Spassky, after bishop takes a4, simply resigned. So this pawn ultimately proved to be the biggest problem in the position. And all of that happened because in the opening, right, we got just bishop takes, and ultimately it was Fischer's opening preparation, which got him now, f4 is a bit of a, this whole plan with knight h4, f4 isn't always necessary. Also, nowadays, people are much less likely to kind of get the center this locked. It's significantly more likely for people to play moves like e4, but not d5, or, for example, knight back to d2 and then try to play f4 in some positions can be also very critical. There's a lot of different ways to play these positions nowadays, but it was the opening preparation combined with just the absolute neutralizing of everything that Boris Spassky wanted to do in the position, and Bobby Fischer won this game. So now the score is all level, 2.5, 2.5. Bobby Fischer is back in the match. Going into game number 6, he's got the white pieces. And the story goes that the Soviet team thought that there was a chance he would surprise Boris with a different first move. Bobby had 99.9% of games beginning with e2 to e4 with the king's pawn. And Spassky responded, hey, whatever he comes at me with in the English or the queen's pawn opening, I'm prepared with the Tartakower defense involving b6, something that Boris had never lost in. Well, let's see what happens. So we kick things off in game 6, and we have c4, and on move 3, a transposition back into the queen's pawn opening, which leads to a queen's gambit declined with bishop to e7. You'll notice that Fischer liked to put his bishop on b4. He was a little bit more confrontational and to the point, wanted to transform the pawn structure if possible, but, bishop e7 is a very Soviet way of playing with h6 and b6. The Makagonov variation of the queen's gambit decline, something that Spassky had tremendous success in. Now, Fischer did not play d4. In fact, he condemned the move d4, just very publicly, and just thought that, e4, best by test. I believe he played it in less than 5 serious games ever. But after cd5, knight d5, and a transformation of the position with rook to c1, you can see very clearly his intentions. He's intending to go down the c-file, maybe queen c2, kind of teaming up with the rook here. We have bishop to e6, by Boris Spassky, queen a4, c5, and now queen a3, pinning this pawn to the queen. But of course, Spassky just plays this move, rook to c8. And here, Bobby Fischer surprised everybody with this fascinating innovation, bishop to b5. And you say, what? Why would you put your bishop there? Just a6. Well, that's the point. In fact, apparently, someone had showed Boris Spassky what to play here. A member of his team showed him this move, queen to b7. Now you say, why would you even go bishop to b5? Well, here's the thing. You're laser beaming black's development, and in many ways, you're being provocative. You actually want black to play the move a6. Why? Because this softens up the structure, right? You're not actually under threat of losing the bishop, and furthermore, at some point you will retreat, and that pawn will just be a target for your bishop. It's a deep meta move here, bishop to b5. I mean, nobody plays bishop b5 unless they have preparation, or if they're the greatest player of the generation. Bishop to b5. That's the difference, really, between the world champion and then the next world champion, or arguably the GOAT, is that they bring a new layer to the game. And so Spassky responded with this move. This allowed Fischer to take on c5. Again, the bishop's not hanging because of the pin that the queen exerts on the rook, and then castles, and now you are threatening to take, so the bishop retreats. And what has happened, he's given Spassky split structure. Again, you see this time and time again. And Fischer was good at this. He was good at this kind of, nagging pressure on pawns. In fact, he said on an interview with Jimmy Carson, link is in the description, that he was a bit of a pawn grabber. And this is potentially kind of like the nicest move of the game. This move e4. You say, I don't understand. What's so good about that move? That's just a free pawn. What kind of drugs was Fischer on? Don't ask, by the way. D takes e4 would have left Spassky's position in ruin. This was like an anti-Soviet move, because now you have doubled isolated e-pawns, an isolated c-pawn, and an isolated a-pawn, and white is still better. And white is better for a pretty absurd reason. White is better because white plays f3 and uses your isolated pawn against you. Now if you take, this allows me to play rook f3 and open up a front of attack towards your position. If you don't take, then I will take you. Good luck. And if you push, well, then my queen comes into the picture. You still have 3 isolated pawns. Now you don't have the extra pawn. So I'm sure this was Fischer's idea. I haven't had a chance to ask him, unfortunately, and he did pass away. But f3, e takes f3, and rook takes f3 would have been the idea, I'm sure. But in the game itself, Bobby played the move e4, and Boris didn't take. He played d4. But what's the problem with d4? Now this beautiful move f4, and suddenly the pawns together begin rolling down the board. But it's not what you think. It's not f5, it's this wedge. This wedge counteracts the knight on d7. A lot of this match was ironically suffocating some of these universal positional geniuses. And that's sort of what he does. He plays bishop to c4, utilizing the light squared complex because he's forced Spassky to put his pieces like that. And then watch this rotation over to the other side of the board to this pawn, which he isolated a long time ago in the transformation of the position and doesn't allow it to move forward. Knight to f8 and now b3. Just a nice move, kind of constructing that side of the board. And now he's ready for this move f5. We have e takes, rook takes, and the next rook is joining the party. And I mean, it just looks like no matter what Spassky does, he cannot prevent the locomotive. He just can't prevent it. We have queen to d8, queen g3, and now h4. Again, you would say, what's this for? Neutralizing the forward knight movement. Now the knight cannot move to either of the squares covered by the pawns. It can also not go back to f8 because it will just be taken. And you have reinforcements. And Spassky's doing his best, but e6. Queen to e5. a4. Every forward move locks it down. By the way, remember this outside a-pawn? Familiar, right? Bishop takes a4 in that other game. You're paying attention, right? You made it this far in the video, right? You know you're amazing. You wait long enough in a GothamChess YouTube video. I'm going to tell you you're amazing. So you're amazing and appreciated. Right? So queen d8. Now he continues. Rook f2. Slow improvement. Rook f3. At this point, it's, a little bit about the time control as well and just trying to find kind of like the right idea. Plays bishop d3, queen e4, and there it is. The second the knight moves. The second the horsey jumped out, it was captured. Rook f6, king g8, bishop c4 consolidating, and the final move of the game, queen to f4 with geometric pressure on h6 and c7. And there's nothing. Black is absolutely dead. This was the best move to facilitate a quick checkmate, and the story goes that after this move, queen to f4, Boris Spassky resigned and applauded. The audience applauded, and Boris Spassky applauded. And, You know, that's actually what the final scene of the Queen's Gambit is based on. Not a spoiler, but at the same time, if you look, it's April 4th, 2021. If you haven't seen the Queen's Gambit yet, it's not my responsibility I spoiled the final scene. I didn't tell you what happens, but there was applause. And with this, Bobby Fischer took a 3.5, 2.5 lead. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. For this next game, I want to take you through the story of the match. This is game number 11. The score is now 6.5, 3.5. This game I want to show as kind of an ode to the preparation of Boris Spassky, showing that it seems like Bobby Fischer was really establishing a sense of dominance, but in this game, Spassky went deep into the Najdorf Sicilian, the open Najdorf Sicilian, which was the Fischer specialty. Bishop to g5, e6, and now this and this. And this is what Fischer played. He basically challenged anyone to tell him that this poison pawn Najdorf variation was bad. And, you know, it's a weird system because ultimately you just sacrifice all your development. There's a point in the opening where all of your pieces are on the back rank, but Fischer made it work. Fischer understood the dynamics of these positions better than anybody in that era. But after bishop e2, h5, and castles, you know, you kind of saw Spassky playing a very professional way in this position. Puts his king on h1, he sets up all his pieces first, and at some point he's going to say, look, man, this doesn't make any sense. You got a Tetris piece of pawns defending your king, you've got a rogue h-pawn, it doesn't make sense, and I'm going to try to march down the board with f5, e5, bring one of my rooks, bring something to the middle, knight to the middle, and just destroy you. So we have bishop d7, and I just said all that, right? I just said all those different ideas. And then here, Boris Spassky played the move, knight to b1. Knight to b1. Okay, and the queen just moves. And then he avoids a queen trade. Knight b1 was a fascinating innovation at the time. And it kind of just kicked out the queen, and now white will use the queen as a target with pawns and knights and other pieces to kick it out and threaten to trap it. And here, Fischer played the move d5, which already was a step in the wrong direction. Apparently, Fischer had to play knight to e7, which, again, to the uninitiated, looks just absolutely bogus. But the idea is that you free up the c6 square. So, for example, here, knight to c3, the queen can go back to c6. And as dumb as this looks, it makes it out alive. Fischer played the move d5, tried to get confrontational and out-calculate, and then he played the move knight to e7. But the problem is now that c4 glues the position. So, for example, knight to f5 attacks the queen, queen slides over. Fischer tried to kind of create chances here with sacrifice and opening this position, but after bishop g4, there's nothing. This forces the knight to retreat. Knight 1, d2, f5, and a3 counter shot to Fischer's queen. This bishop is not actually hanging because the queen is in danger, and then when the queen goes back, there's this move c5. After queen b5, Spassky again avoids the trade of queens. Laser beam down to h8. Seems like he's just one step ahead of Fischer every move of this game. Takes a4, h3, but the truth is that there's nothing. It's a whole lot of nothing. Bobby Fischer is without a queen. We have rook to h3, the queen jumps into f6, Bobby activates the knight, Spassky continues to play on that side of the board, c6, bishop comes back, and now pawn takes, rook e1, bishop e7, and kabam. Rook takes e6. The queen is no longer threatened, and if Bobby takes on e6, we have queen e6. These pieces are nice, but they're not really creating any threats. Knight to h4, I just go back, and there's nothing. And so after rook takes e6, it was actually Bobby Fischer who resigned to Boris Spassky. Spassky showing tremendous class. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to lie to you. This match was not close beyond this. Bobby won again a few games later, and games 14 to 20 were all draws. Bobby just took this approach because we know the match format. And the final game that I'm going to show you is game number 21, where the score is 11.5 to 8.5. If you've never heard about this World Championship, perhaps the result is still a mystery to you. If you have heard about this World Championship, then, well, let's begin. e4, c5, and during the match, Fischer went back to a different Sicilian. Quite frequently, actually. He played the Najdorf again, but, you know, he played different variations throughout the match. Knight c3, knight c6, this is like a Taimanov, this variation is known as, potentially can be the Paulson Khan if you put the queen on c7, but knight c6 is back to a Taimanov Sicilian. Nowadays, you can even take on c6, but bishop to e3, standard development, and d5. Striking back in the center, ed5, and Fischer gets a position where the structure is known as the hanging pawn structure. These D and C pawns kind of standing alone. The The person with the pawns wants to advance them and wedge them forward, and also play around them with the open space, potentially even creating an attack on his opponent. The guy playing against the pawns wants to create a blockade and then slowly chip away at them. So let's see how the pawn structure is determined. So first things first, Spassky applies a little bit of pressure to the pawns, but in this position, you know, a much better move would have been knight to a4. Much better is a bit of a strong statement, especially when you're playing Bobby Fischer, but you've really got to focus kind of on blockading the pawns and then suppressing black's movement. I'm not saying I'm a better player than Spassky. I'm saying I'm taking from the great players of that generation and future generations, kind of explaining how the position should be played. Because after queen f3, bishop e6, you allow Fischer to get what he wants. He plays c5, right? Bishop takes, queen takes, pawn takes. And here, okay, sure, you know, white objectively doesn't have any problems, but neither does Fischer. And actually, in some astounding turn of events, despite this, what should be a terrible structural weakness, there's really no way for white to capitalize. Like, black is, because of the open lines in the position on the b file and the bishops, black is the one calling the shots. And so here Spassky played knight takes d5, bishop d5, and sacrificed his rook to kind of create this very nice structure, the 3-on-1 with the weak a-pawn and the damage structure on this side of the board. So Fischer brought the rook down to d2 to pressure the pawns. Bishop takes a6 by Spassky, rook c2, and going for this endgame, bishop in 4 versus rook in 3. And basically, Spassky must have thought, I got the 2 pawns, this structure is terrible, this must be at least a draw, right? So rook to d8, a4, rook d2, bishop c4. It's actually interesting. Rook takes f2 is up for grabs, but that allows the pawn to make it to a6, which could be a little bit ugly. So instead of that, Fischer plays this move, not allowing either of the pawns to move. You push the a-pawn, I take it. You push the b-pawn, I take the a-pawn. So we have king f8, king f3, king e7, g4. And this move is designed to prevent the forward movement of these pawns. But that's the beautiful thing about playing a guy like Bobby Fischer. He looks at what you want to do and goes, oh yeah? Oh yeah? Take it. And damage your own structure and give me the passed h-pawn. Now I'm going to play f6, because now my pawn is out of the way of your light squared bishop. Now I'm going to play h6 to get out of the way of that bishop, and king d6. Where am I going, Boris? Where am I going? Am I going to the king side? Am I going to the queen side? Where am I going? We have king to f3, rook a1, king g2, king e5. Oh yeah, I'm going this way. I'm going to shut your king down. Bishop d7, rook b1, rook b2, rook a2. I'm waiting for my opportunity. Bishop e6, and here I play h5. Now actually, the interesting thing about the move bishop to d7 is that since it's the 41st move of the game, meaning it's the next wave of time that the players will receive, they did things called adjournments, where you write your move down on a piece of paper and you put it in an envelope to be resumed the next day. The interesting thing is that bishop d7 is a bad move, and now you have to live with that decision until the next day. King to h3 would have prevented the king from coming to g4, joining the h-pawn, and even at the cost of 1 pawn, there is a chance maybe that Spassky could have moved his pawns up and challenged and you know, went with the king and tried to make a draw. But he had played the move bishop d7, and the next day the game was supposed to resume, but Spassky called via telephone to surrender not just the game, but ultimately the World Championship match. And the arbiter did express a little bit of disappointment that Spassky was not there to congratulate Bobby Fischer, but given the earlier applause, I think we can let it go. And so with this, Bobby Fischer won the match 12.5 to 8.5, becoming the world champion in 1972. He was a 29-year-old brash and eccentric American. Now, in this video, I'm not going to get into the entire story of his life afterward, but the World Championship was supposed to happen in 1975 with him and Anatoly Karpov, and again, Fischer tried to adjust the format. He didn't believe in all these draws. He thought that they should play only where wins counted, and so on and so forth. I did put a link in the description if you want to read a little bit more about this match and Bobby Fischer in general, but as far as 1972 goes, the ability to overcome the 2-0 deficit and just all the mind games and different things going on during the match, and being the American icon of chess, really the first of his kind. It's incredible the things that Bobby Fischer was able to accomplish. And credit also goes to his competitor Boris Spassky, who had the weight of the Soviet Union, the history of the chess in the Soviet Union, the whole Cold War element between the Soviet Union and the United States. Just simply, I mean, you had to live it. I mean, there are older Americans and folks around the world now who lived that era, or maybe were young kids during that era. and many of them say that, there was no boom like the 1972 chess boom. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the conclusion of this video. I hope you very much enjoyed it. Do let me know in the comments below if you've made it this far, and also if you have some ideas for future content similar to this one. I'm happy to make them. Well, what more to say? Welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you're a returning viewer, and I will see you in the next video.